Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on ISO 27701 for privacy information management. Before we get going, can you please just confirm that you can hear me just by typing yes into the chat box? Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, we'll get started then. So before we begin, my name is Laura Fletcher. I'm the Commercial and Customer Experience Director for NQA. It's a pleasure to have so many of you with us today. I'm also joined by Christian Marsh, who is our Information Security Certification Manager here in the UK, and he's on hand to answer any technical questions that you may have. Just a bit of housekeeping first of all. To make you all aware, a copy of the slides and the recording of this webinar will be made available and will be sent to everyone following the webinar. If you do have any questions throughout, we do encourage them, so please just type them into the chat box and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible towards the end of the webinar. If you have any issues with hearing me, please do just type and let me know in the chat box. A bit of a brief introduction to who NQA are to set the scene before we get going on 27701. NQA is a global certification partner. We've been operating now for around 31 years in over 90 different countries, and as a result we've got around about 50,000 active certificates globally, and that is across a broad spectrum of standards. So the one that we're going to talk about today is ISO 27701 2019, which is Privacy Information Management. By definition, the standard defines itself as security techniques, an extension to ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 for privacy information management requirements and guidelines. And it was published in August 2019, so it's a brand new standard. What that actually means, because that's quite a lot of verbatim there, is that it's an extension to ISO 27001 that covers the management of personal data. And whether that's personal information or privacy information, it's personal data that an organisation may deal with. And basically, the standard is designed to provide guidance for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and improvement of a privacy information management system. So what does that mean in practice? Well, actually, it enhances an already implemented information security management system. So by its definition, it is an extension. That means that you must have 27001 in place already to have 27701 or to implement them both simultaneously. 27701 enhances your information security management system by addressing the specific privacy requirements put in place, and it puts in place the systems and the infrastructure designed to comply with relevant legislation surrounding data protection. Because it's an international standard, it's obviously internationally recognised and provides the framework that we expect from all international standards, demonstrating effective management of data privacy. So it's a very logical progression for management systems that cover 27001 already and clients that may already have that management system in place or maybe looking to implement that management system. It has been given a lot of attention recently because it is being linked very closely to GDPR and other legislative requirements. Now, it's important to note that this standard does not explicitly meet GDPR certification, but what it does do, as the same with other international standards, is that it requires organisations to be compliant with relevant legislation, and it provides a comprehensive and universal governance approach which is mapped directly to legislative requirements such as GDPR. That's important to note. So to recap, it extends your ISMS with a privacy information management system and therefore links in privacy specific controls. With that, it's important that the standard itself recognises the overlap globally across different privacy legislations in order to help organisations that do transfer data across different boundaries, reducing the complexity with data risk, particularly relevant to private data and privacy information. So you'll see there a list of bullet points of ones that it does help to recognise the overlap between those pieces of legislation. What it also does is it lays out the specific privacy information management system requirements and lists all of the applicable privacy related controls for both data controllers and data processors. So it's critical if you're to implement 27701 that you understand whether you are a data controller and or processor and the responsibilities allocated and associated with those two areas. So how does it differ to ISO 27001? Well, we've all heard about 27001. It's the go-to standard, the gold standard across the industry for information security management currently. We're seeing it crop up more and more in government tenders and other applicable organisations that do tender requirements. 27701 is set to be the go-to standard for compliance towards GDPR regulations and similar legislation. It aligns to the legislation of GDPR, but it also allows organisations to use the same framework and the robust standards that we've put in place and the management system they've put in place to incorporate other laws and pieces of legislation and regulations and requirements that they might encounter by doing business overseas. That makes it an excellent choice for organisation, no matter what the shape or size of your business. If you are dealing with personal data, it's a good expansion on your information security management system to ensure that you continue to comply with the accountability principle of GDPR. One of the core ways that it does differ to 27001 is referenced at the bottom. So within 27001 as a standard, you see the term information security throughout. Within 27701, it expands on this, on that clause and on that statement, and it calls it information security and privacy. All the way throughout the standard, that's what's referenced, information security and privacy. And if you want to see an example of that, head over to Annex F of 27701. Yep, there is an Annex F, believe it. There's lots of annexes to this standard, and you'll be able to see that in practice. So what are the core requirements then of this standard, of this new standard privacy information management systems? Well, they can be split into 4 groups, which I've listed below. So it links first of all to 27001, and that's all outlined in clause 5, which we'll go into in a little bit more information in a second. It also links through to 27002, and that's outlined in clause 6. It asks for and provides guidance on personally identifiable information, PII, for controllers. That's outlined in clause 7, and PII processes and the guidance for that is outlined in clause 8. So let's have a look at those in a bit more detail. So first of all, within clause 4, 27701 redefines the term customer. And it redefines it to be an organisation or person who has a contract with a controller or a processor. So it's critical that we define whether an organisation is a controller or a processor and whether you have a contract with that customer in that respect. 5.1 goes through, the clause 5.1 goes through the terms that we've just been through, mentioning information security and extending that to information security and privacy. And it also makes reference to PII in there as well. 5.2 goes into the context of the organisation. So in this section, it actually states that as part of the context that you do for 27001, you have to expand on that to determine, as an organisation, your role as a data controller and or a data processor. And as part of that, within the context, you have to explore those internal and external factors that might influence your privacy information management system, including your interested parties, that must have those parties, and you must acknowledge the interests and responsibilities of those parties, those interested parties, with the processing of personally identifiable information. Clause 5.4 then goes into the risk element of PII and the planning process. So it states that you must have conducted risk assessments and they must take into account personally identifiable information and the processing of that information. So you have to not only conduct your risk assessments, but you then have to assess the potential consequences of if the risk identified materialises. And that links very closely through to the controls in Annex A and Annex B of 27701. So it states as part of that, you must assess those controls and they must be included in your statement of applicability. And that links through directly to 27001 as a standard. For those of you that are that can identify with that standard, obviously this is where you then further apply that to your personally identifiable information. Clause 6.2 goes into information security policies. So this links directly into your PII. It states that policies must include PII protection. Now that can be as a separate document or as part of your existing information security policy if you choose to expand on that. Either way, that's up to you, so long as you ensure that that policy does include PII protection. And as part of that, you need to have a statement that shows your dedication, support and commitment to personal information, personally identifiable information and the protection of that. Linked to that, obviously, you need to clearly allocate responsibilities within the organisation and within external parties as well that might be privy to it. And you should also consider any applicable legislation requirements that might form part of that as well. I'm just going to pause to obviously make sure if you have got any questions, please do pop them into the chat box on the side. We will be answering them at the end, but just as a reminder that if you have got any, please do pop them in there. We have got some coming through already, which is fantastic to see. So what about the rest of the standard? If any of you have already purchased the standard, it's a very long standard. The majority of it is, well, there's 40 pages of guidance, to be honest, which is about 50%, if not more, of the standard. And that links through to guidance of 27002. There's also, as I stated earlier, 6 different annexes, Annex A to F, that cover various different controls and also map it to other standards and pieces of legislation out there in the industry. It's actually quite good to run through all of those and familiarise yourself with them, particularly if you've got some of these standards in place already, or you're already linking through to GDPR or other pieces of legislation. Very good guidance and mapping exercises within there as well that can save a lot of time. So do familiarise yourselves with those. Just moving on then to some of the key drivers. So we've been through the standard itself and vaguely what it looks like. Some of the other key drivers then for why as a business you may go for this. The obvious one really is to manage the risk associated with the privacy of your data. And it's a hot topic in media and across industries at the moment. You know, lots of increased concerns from stakeholders, lots of risk associated with organisations as well. And really, by implementing a management system that addresses this head on, you're demonstrating to both internal and external stakeholders your commitment towards your privacy of data, and also that arrangements are in place should anything happen. There's lots of organisations that are already dealing with personal data and high risk data. If you're contracting with them, either as if they're a customer or if you're their customer, it's important that you show that external stakeholder commitment to them. And I'm sure that we will hear a lot more about this standard over the coming years. Finally, it also demonstrates to regulators that you're providing a material commitment as a business to managing your data privacy rights and the risks associated with them as well, which can be beneficial in the event that issues do arise in the future. Who will benefit from it then? Well, any organisation that deals with personal data, which as an argument, every organisation deals with that, can benefit from having a management system in place, a privacy information management system. It gives you a great way of demonstrating that you've got effective systems in place to support compliance with GDPR and other pieces of legislation, but it also enables you to assess, react and reduce the risk associated with that personal information as well. Obviously, if you are trading with an organisation that has to comply with a piece of data legislation such as GDPR or any of the other ones, it's a great way of showing compliance with those areas as well and demonstrating that you're committed to complying with it. As I've previously stated, though, it's important to know that 27701 and certification to 27701 does not confirm legal compliance to GDPR. But what it does is it provides a valuable framework to show your efforts in compliance towards the legislation. So many of you might now be asking what the process is for certification. There are different routes that you can take, and as part of this, it's important to note that ISO 27701 is currently not an accredited certification. It's not offered as an accredited certification, so NQA would offer unaccredited certification currently, but we are actively engaged with UCAS and in discussions with UCAS and other relevant accreditation bodies on gaining accreditation to offer this standard. Now, there's 3 different routes. So you might be an existing client that might already have 27001 certification with NQA, or you might be a client that might already have existing 27001 certification but with a different certification body to NQA, or you might not have 27001 in place already, and you might want to do an integrated implementation of both standards. What's important to know, and as I've stated before, is that this is an extension to 27001, which means that you cannot gain independent certification for 27701 without having 27001 certification. Okay, and that's because there's a significant overlap there, and as the title of the standard, it is an extension and a bolt-on to 27001. So if you are with NQA already and you're one of our clients and you already have ISO 27001 with us, that's brilliant. What you need to do is submit a quote request for 27701 as an extension. We will quote you for that, and we will then conduct a scope extension audit. Going forward then, that audit will be aligned with your next routine surveillance or recertification audit moving forward, so that it is completed with your consistent and your current assessor for consistency, and your certificate will be aligned with your existing ISO 27001 certificate. You will get a separate certificate for 27701. However, the expiry dates and the scope will be aligned with your 27001 certificate. If you have ISO 27001 certification with another certification body that is an accredited certification body, we can transfer that over to NQA, and we can conduct a transfer review of that, transfer that 27001 certification. We will then conduct a scope extension audit for 27701, and again we will pick up the routine audits alongside your 27001 routine surveillance audit with NQA. Same applies with the certificate. You will have a separate certificate for ISO 27701 that will have a concurrent expiry date to the 27001 certificate. If you are a new client, so if you don't hold 27001 certification currently, what we can do is submit a quote request form. We will quote you, and we will conduct an integrated and combined stage 1 and stage 2 audit for both ISO 27001 and ISO 27701 concurrently. Upon successful completion of that, you will receive 2 certificates, one for ISO 27001, one for ISO 27701, again with concurrent expiry dates. And then we will enter an ongoing certification cycle for that annually. That will be an integrated management system with the same auditor for both standards. If you are transferring to NQA, we can do all of that. The transfer review is complimentary. There is no charge for that. So what are the next steps following this webinar? There's ample amounts of information on our website on ISO 27701. I'm sure many of you have seen it already. Please do go on there. There's lots of blogs going on there on a regular basis with further technical guidance. We are also running follow-on webinars to this one in the new year that go into more of the specifics relevant to the clauses and how to implement that. You will also receive, following this webinar, a full copy of this presentation and recording of this presentation, and we will also be circulating a implementation guide for ISO 27701 as well that details the specifics of this. If you are interested in getting a quote for certification to ISO 27701, you can either submit a quote request form through our website or click on the Get a Quote, which you can see there, and one of our team will happily get in touch with you and provide you with the details, no matter which route you are in. Alternatively, what you can do is you can get in touch with me directly. My contact details are on the screen there, and we will happily have a call or run through anything, or come and meet with you, or provide you with a quote depending on your specific requirements. So that's it from me for now. I'm just going to have a look to see what questions we've had through, and please do continue to get in touch should you have any questions, and we'll run through those and answer as many as we can now. Please bear with me, it's tiny on the screen, so I need my glasses to see it. Okay, so one of the questions is what GDPR certification exists. There is no GDPR certification that exists currently. So hang on, sorry, one moment, I'm just going to pass you on to Christian.
Hello. There is currently a BS 10012 which is specific to GDPR, but it is not an international standard, it only covers GDPR. ISO 27701 is can be implemented internationally and will be recognised internationally.
Thank you, Christian. That also covers off one of the next standards about how 27701 compares to BS 10012. To reiterate, ISO 27701 is an internationally recognised standard, so it is the preferred route that NQA would advise organisations go down to show compliance with data legislation and privacy information management systems. Okay, the next question I'm going to pass on to Christian as well. How does ISO 27701 require any more than clauses 4.2, 8.2 and A18.1 of ISO 27001 for compliance? Did CBs already check GDPR if they audit these clauses of 27001 properly?
Right, so 27001 does not cover some specific requirements of GDPR. For instance, the right to be forgotten, the right to transit your information, and well, there are several others, but it doesn't fully comply with GDPR.
Okay, the next question. Why would I need 27701 if I already work towards 27001? Great question. 27701 expands upon your information security management system, and it expands to really home in and focus on the risks associated with personal data and privacy information. So it's a bolt-on, it's an extension, it's a good way of demonstrating to stakeholders that you've taken that next step towards ensuring commitment and showing and demonstrating commitment towards personally identifiable information. Do we have a time frame for accreditation for this standard? No, we don't currently know. It's a hot topic of discussion across the industry. We are working very closely with UCAS as our accreditation body in the UK, and as soon as we know any more, we will let everyone know. But for the time being, no, there is no time frame for accreditation. Would we automatically get formal accreditation if UCAS do make this an accredited standard? No, there will be a process that goes through, that NQA will have to go through, and other certification bodies as well, to transform our offering from unaccredited to accredited. Your certification will stand as an unaccredited certificate, providing you have your obviously routine ongoing surveillance audits and that you're successful in those. As and when that happens, and as and when it becomes an accredited standard, NQA will publicise and will communicate with all clients on the route towards that, but we will make that as painless as possible throughout the process. How much extra time is needed for 27701 on top of 27001? That depends on the organisation. If you are interested in in a quote for that and understanding how much extra time is needed, we can provide you with that. There are lots of complexities that go into us determining the amount of audit time that's required for an organisation, dependent on size, risk, profile, elements and controls that are applicable. So there's no one answer that fits all for that, I'm afraid. So you would need to get in touch with us to get a specific idea of the audit duration there. Is ISO 27701 also a risk-based framework? So can you still obtain and maintain certification to this standard even if there are some key risks which have been identified and some which are being managed? I'm just going to pass you on to Christian for this one.
Right, so managing risk. The key part of setting your objectives, which is that they have to be in line with the requirements of your organisation and the customer and legislative requirements. So yes, you can maintain certification based on risks, but obviously if you're not meeting the requirements of legislation, then you're not managing risk enough.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, I think that's it that we've had for questions. Someone's asked whether there'll be a cost associated with moving it from accredited to unaccredited, from unaccredited to accredited. Until I know the specifics of what's entailed there, I cannot tell you. But as I've said before, we will make it as painless as we possibly can. We do work very closely with our regulator to make sure that we do smooth transitions. We've seen that with the migration from OSAS 18001 to 45001 as well. Another question, any idea what insurance companies think about this? Is it likely to bring premiums down? Good question. Hang on a minute.
Obviously we can't speak on behalf of insurance companies, but there is indication that in some places it may actually be already happening. There in Italy, there apparently is a insurance company that will give you better rates if you're certified to 27001. So there's no reason to think that it might not move further on from that for 27701. What are the requirements for scoping of the PIMS compared to the RMS? The basis of any scope is the context information. As you saw earlier, there are some additional requirements when looking at the context of your organisation. So there are further things, there are further steps that need to be taken, and you need to look into in greater depth any personal identifier information that you hold. So yes, there is some more work to be done if you've got ISMS, but it's not a huge amount. Obviously, the risk assessments is going to be the key part. You're going to have to expand that to cover the new controls and all that further information that you hold.
Thank you very much, Christian. Okay, any more questions? Does that mean that two of our certs will have different scope wording? Your certificates will be linked together. So your 27701 will be linked to your 27001. The scope is obviously determined by you as an organisation. So that is specific to yourselves. Okay, last call for any further questions. Just hang on a couple of minutes. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I hope you found it useful. You've got my contact details on the screen, so if you do have any questions, please do ask and do get in touch with us should you need anything further. Have a lovely rest of the day. Enjoy your lunch, everyone. I know I will, and see you soon. Thank you.